We've been talking about the Supreme Court decision last week, the Fulton case. This was the city of Philadelphia and the Catholic Social Services doing foster placement there in the city. They had a contract with the city. The city said, no, unless you will agree to place children with same-sex couples, we're not going to allow you to do this. And as we've been discussing, the court ruled in favor of Catholic Social Services, but a very narrow decision that affects just that particular case, not addressing the underlying issues. And what we're seeing is more and more these activists on the left, LGBTQ activists, that are really engaging in militant efforts to force all Americans to embrace their lifestyles. And even when it's in confrontation with and in contradiction to religious beliefs, long-held traditional religious beliefs. They want those to be subservient to this push of forced celebration. So what does religious freedom look like going forward? Are we seeing some positive trends in the court? We were just talking about with Travis Weber that 9 times out of 10 or even more, when a case like this makes its way to the Supreme Court, religious freedom prevails. Are we seeing a pattern that would suggest that maybe the court is going to address the underlying issue and set a precedent in favor of religious freedom? Here to talk about this and more, former U.S. Solicitor General Ken Starr, who served for a season as the president and chancellor at Baylor University, and he's an author. His latest book, which we've talked about before on the program, Religious Liberty in Crisis. It came out this past April. Ken, welcome back to the program.
Thank you, Tony. So good to be with you.
How's the book doing?
It's doing well, but I hope your viewers will buy an extra copy.
Well,
we want everyone to learn these great principles, and I know we'll be talking about Fulton, but Fulton is an example of the good news that's happening. But I look forward to our conversation. Thank you for having me on.
Well, the book was very timely. Of course, you didn't have to look into a crystal ball to see that religious freedom was, is, and will continue to be under assault in our country. But let's talk first about the Supreme Court decision last week. Your initial thoughts on it?
Oh, I was delighted. Obviously, all of us wanted the 1990 opinion in Employment Division versus Smith to be overruled. Congress has stepped in with the Religious Freedom Restoration Act, which was extremely helpful. That was in 1993, but there's been so much cultural water over the dam, as you rightly focus on. But I didn't expect the court to overrule it, and I think that our concerns should obviously continue, but I think we should view the glass as definitely half full, and we should be thankful that the Supreme Court of the United States was unanimous in supporting religious liberty. I've read and I understand the concerns of the, not the dissenters, but those who wanted the court to go farther, especially Justice Alito's very colorful suggestion that today's decision is like a piece of magic paper that disappears. And there is that danger, but I think it's more theoretical than real. The symbolism, first of all, politically and culturally, of the Supreme Court of the United States, 9-0, rebuffing essentially the cultural elite, including, I'm a lawyer, the American Bar Association sided with Philadelphia. The cultural elite was entirely in favor of the city of Philadelphia coming in and excluding this wonderful Catholic Social Services has been in operation in Philadelphia, not only uncontroversially, but effectively for well over a century. And so this was a culture wars kind of attack on CSS. I was so sad to see that the judges in the lower courts all sided with Philadelphia. The district court sided with Philadelphia. The 3 judges on the Court of Appeals sided with Philadelphia. So I think we should be celebrating and girding our loins, as Justice Amy Coney Barrett suggested. Let's start doing the hard work about what's going to replace Employment Division versus Smith, which just says, just to make sure we're on common ground, that if here a legislature or a city council passes a law of general applicability, it is neutral in terms of it's not singling out religion for separate treatment, then the judges are not to create, under the free exercise clause, a religious-based conscientious objection. Now, that was the rule of Employment Division versus Smith. But Employment Division versus Smith set its face against the great traditions of American constitutional law. It was out of step. But now it's still on the books, other than with respect to the federal government. It still applies to the federal government. But with respect to state and local governments, they can say, look, Employment Division versus Smith will correct, the city of Philadelphia may very well do this, will correct this defect of allowing an exemption, or the decision maker in Philadelphia in the foster child placement regulatory apparatus to not permit any exceptions whatsoever. And then we have Employment Division versus Smith all over again. So the case will come up. There's no question. Right. The case will come up. But I'm optimistic. Not that it'll be unanimous, but I think it'll be 6-3 to overrule Employment Division versus Smith, and for religious freedom to have yet another victory to celebrate and to be thankful for.
Well, let's talk about that way forward, because I agree. I think I actually like reading Justice Alito's opinions, because they remind me of Scalia. He's kind of taken on that role. But Justice Gorsuch also wrote about this. He mentioned, he said, quote, one way or another, the majority seems determined to declare there is no need or reason to revisit Smith today, but tell that to Catholic Social Services. Its litigation has already lasted years, and today's resolution promises more of the same. So, I mean, there's going to be other cases in the pipeline. But you've worked before the Supreme Court before, and you know, I kind of get this sense that the court operates with this concern over maintaining homeostasis or political equilibrium in their decision, not to radically change things from precedent too much. Is the court in Roberts and this decision and others, do you think they're setting the stage to revisit Smith and overturn it and go back to a more vibrant view of the First Amendment?
Yes, I do. But you know, we're reading tea leaves here. But I was encouraged by Justice Barrett's separate opinion that was joined by Justice Kavanaugh. So two great friends of religious freedom were saying, let's take this one step at a time. We don't need to go farther in this particular case. So I believe that the shots across the bow from Justice Alito and Justice Gorsuch are very helpful to us. They tell us that there will be another day and another fight. And again, I'm very sanguine. In a nutshell, for 40 years, with very few exceptions, the Supreme Court has been a friend of religious liberty and reversing district courts and courts of appeals that have tended to go the other way, following the lead of the culture. So I think we should, again, be very thankful, watchful. Let's move forward, keep the court in our prayers, and do the hard work that Justice Amy Coney Barrett has suggested that we do. What is going to replace, she asked, Employment Division versus Smith, that the issues just weren't developed enough. So it's an incremental approach, and that's not unusual for the court to say, let's proceed incrementally, as opposed to let's do everything all at once in the fashion of the court under Earl Warren a half century plus ago.
So, Ken Starr, if I were to say to, well, I'm going to have you say it, to our viewers, our listeners across the country, we have a duty in this. We have a part to play, and that is to live out our religious conviction and not be intimidated by those overreaching government authorities that may try to limit, as the city of Philadelphia did, because we'll never get to the court revisiting this unless there are those Americans who are willing to stand up and exercise it.
Exactly. We're to be, as Joshua of old enjoined us to be, courageous. We're to be like the two. I love to use the analogy of the two spies going into the land of Canaan and coming back and say, let's go, we can do this, as opposed to the 10 timorous spies who were probably the best and the brightest and the bravest and so forth of the 10 tribes that they represented. Let's go with the two. and be courageous, be vigilant, and exactly right. Let's blow the whistle when religious liberty is under assault. Let's do the work that I think we've been called upon to do. I like to call upon the Apostle Paul's example in the book of Acts. He was willing to litigate. We shouldn't be litigating against brothers and sisters, but we can litigate against the culture, doing this peacefully, obviously, winsomely, but also persuasively. And we're winning these cases in the Supreme Court of the United States time and time again.
And it doesn't always lead to litigation, because sometimes it's just, if we all were committed to living out our faith unhindered by the cultural forces or the government authorities that are sometimes contrary, not all, but some, if we would have said, you know, we don't care, we're going to do what we were told to do, you know, who are we going to obey, man or God? I actually think you'll find the other side in retreat if there's enough of us standing up, exercising these fundamental rights. And the good thing about this is that we have a solid foundation as Americans because of our First Amendment freedom.
Precisely right. We do have to stand up at times, and you're right. It may very well be that litigation will not be necessary. And God bless those decision makers, city council persons and so forth, school board members, who are willing to say, you know, let's don't fight this. We may have a different view culturally than the faith communities over here, but it's not worth it. But thus far, let us give thanks for the wonderful groups like Alliance Defending Freedom and First Liberty and the Becket Fund, and those who are, I call them the Sentinels of Liberty. There are Minutemen who head to the Lexington Village Green because those who would oppose liberty, those who would oppose freedom, are on the march. They're heading toward Concord. So we need to be prepared for that. And happily, I think we are ever more vigilant, ever more aware, and what we see is the Supreme Court is rewarding these kinds of efforts on behalf of groups. Here, it was the Becket Fund that successfully defended Catholic social services. And in this, denominational lines, Tony, in my view, just don't count, because we're all in, shall I say, the faith community of freedom. We all are united by a fervent commitment to not our particular philosophy. We're talking about a constitutional philosophy of freedom.
Ken Starr, as always, great to talk with you. Before we wrap up, where can folks get a copy of your book?
Well, wherever books are sold, as the old saying goes, but I do have a plug for a Christian bookstore. And of course, Mardell's carries it, by the way, a prominent chain of bookstores, over 30 in number across the country. But there's also a small mom and pop shop. I'll be very quick about this, but if people want to make note, heartsandmindsbooks.com, a Christian bookstore outside Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. I have no ownership interest, but they're a wonderful couple, godly couple who have this bookstore, and they'll give you a 20% discount.
All right. Well, we'll tell people to check them out. Ken Starr, as always, great to talk with you. Thanks so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Tony. Always a pleasure.